Sigmund Freud believed that every woman on Earth was psychologically damaged, not just different from men, damaged. According to the father of modern psychology, women suffer from a fundamental deficiency that shapes their entire existence. A wound so deep that it explains why women seek validation, compete with each other, and feel incomplete without male approval. This isn't some fringe theory. This is the foundation of how Western society views female psychology. For over a century, this idea has influenced therapy, relationships, and how women see themselves. And the most disturbing part? It's still working. He called it his most important discovery about women. And before you dismiss this as outdated nonsense, understand this. Whether you believe it or not, this concept has shaped your life. It's embedded in our culture so deeply that millions of women live according to its principles without even knowing it. The theory claims that when little girls discover anatomical differences between boys and girls, they feel fundamentally lacking. This moment of recognition creates a psychological wound that never heals. Every behavior that follows, the need for approval, the competition with other women, the feeling that something is missing, stems from this primal sense of deficiency. Sound ridiculous? Look around. Look at social media culture. Look at the beauty industry. Look at how women treat each other. Look at the patterns in your own life, the constant seeking of external validation, the feeling that you're not enough, the need to be chosen, to be completed by someone else. According to this theory, it's all compensation for what you believe you lack. But here's what's truly disturbing. These ideas didn't just observe female behavior. They became a blueprint that told women exactly how they should think and feel. And generations of women have followed this script, believing it was their natural psychology. To understand how we got here, you need to know the man behind the theory. Vienna, 1856. A world where women couldn't vote, couldn't own property, couldn't even speak in public without scandal. Into this repressed society was born Sigmund Freud, a neurologist who would become the architect of the unconscious mind. But Freud wasn't content treating surface symptoms. He wanted to dive deeper into the human psyche than anyone had dared before. He believed that everything we do, every choice we make, every emotion we feel, is driven by unconscious forces we don't even recognize. Unconscious drives, he claimed, were the primary force behind all human behavior. And early childhood experiences shaped our entire adult psychology. This was scandalous. Victorian society barely acknowledged that sex existed, let alone that it controlled human behavior. But the man was relentless. He mapped the territories of the mind where no one else had the courage to go. The ego, the id, the superego. Dreams as the royal road to the unconscious. The Oedipus complex. Each theory more shocking than the last. And then he turned his penetrating gaze toward women specifically. What he saw there would become his most controversial legacy. Because in his analysis of female psychology, he didn't just see difference, he saw deficiency. He saw incompleteness. He saw a fundamental flaw that would define women for generations to come. The theory emerged from his clinical observations of female patients. Women who seemed plagued by hysteria, jealousy, vanity, and what he perceived as a weaker sense of justice and morality. Rather than questioning the society that oppressed these women, he looked for biological explanations. And he found one that would change everything. According to his analysis, the moment a young girl realizes she lacks male anatomy, her entire psychological development shifts. She blames her mother for this perceived deficiency. She turns to her father, hoping he can give her what she's missing. When that fails, she eventually resigns herself to her incomplete state and seeks compensation through other means. This isn't just about childhood development. This wound, he claimed, never heals. It becomes the driving force behind every major decision a woman makes. Her career ambitions, compensation, her desire for children, compensation, her need for male attention, compensation, her competition with other women. All of it stemming from this primal sense of lacking something essential. the implications were staggering. Women's entire psychology could be reduced to envy and the desperate attempt to fill a perceived void. Their ambitions weren't genuine drives for achievement, but elaborate coping mechanisms. Their relationships weren't based on genuine connection, but on the need to acquire what they believed they were missing. And here's where it gets even more disturbing. This theory didn't stay confined to psychology textbooks. It seeped into every aspect of culture. It justified keeping women out of positions of power because they were seen as fundamentally driven by envy rather than genuine competence. It explained away female anger as hysteria rather than legitimate grievance. It reduced women's complex emotional lives to simple compensation for biological inadequacy. The advertising industry latched onto these ideas with devastating efficiency. Sell women products that promise to make them more attractive, more complete, more worthy of male attention. The beauty industry exploded, offering endless solutions to the fundamental inadequacy that these psychological theories had diagnosed. Fashion, cosmetics, diet culture, plastic surgery, all promising to fix what was supposedly wrong with the female form. Media and literature embraced these concepts too. Stories of women who needed to be rescued, completed, or chosen by men. Female characters whose primary motivation was securing male approval. The damsel in distress became the dominant narrative because it reflected what psychology was claiming about female nature. But perhaps most damaging of all, these ideas shaped how women saw themselves and each other. If female psychology was fundamentally based on envy and compensation, then other women weren't allies, they were competition. Every successful woman represented a threat because she had somehow obtained what others lacked. Female friendships became tinged with suspicion and comparison rather than support and solidarity. The therapeutic profession, too, was built on these foundations. Women entering therapy were often diagnosed with problems stemming from their supposed inability to accept their biological reality. Rather than addressing the social conditions that limited their options, therapy focused on helping women adjust to their presumed natural inadequacy. Generations of women grew up absorbing these messages without even realizing it. They learned to see themselves as incomplete beings who needed external validation to feel whole. They learned to compete rather than collaborate with other women. They learned to seek their worth through appearance, male attention, and conventional markers of femininity, rather than through their own achievements and inner development. Look at the patterns that still dominate female behavior today. The endless scrolling through social media, comparing appearances and lifestyles. The beauty industry that generates hundreds of billions of dollars by convincing women they need to fix what's wrong with them. The persistent wage gap explained away by claims that women aren't as ambitious or competitive as men. The way successful women are often described as aggressive or difficult, while similar behavior in men is seen as leadership. Consider the phenomenon of female competition that plays out in workplaces, social circles, and online spaces. Women undermining each other, spreading gossip, engaging in subtle forms of sabotage. This isn't natural female behavior. This is learned behavior based on the belief that there isn't enough success, attention, or value to go around, because women are fundamentally competing for external sources of completion. The dating and relationship patterns reflect these ideas too. Women who feel they can't be single, who jump from relationship to relationship, seeking someone to make them feel whole. The pressure to be chosen, to be picked, to be validated by male attention. The way women's worth is still often measured by their ability to attract and keep a partner, rather than by their individual achievements. Even professional ambition gets filtered through these concepts. Women who succeed are often accused of being compensating for something rather than being genuinely driven. Female leaders are scrutinized for their appearance and personal lives in ways that male leaders never are. The persistent belief that women's motivation for success must somehow be connected to their emotional or psychological inadequacies rather than simple professional drive. The internalized voice that tells women they're not good enough, that something is missing, that they need to prove their worth constantly. This isn't their authentic inner voice. This is the echo of psychological theories that diagnose them as fundamentally flawed from the beginning. But here's what those early theories got completely wrong. They mistook the effects of oppression for natural psychology. When you systematically limit someone's opportunities, deny them education, legal rights, and social power, of course they're going to develop behaviors focused on seeking approval and validation from those who hold the power. When you tell someone from birth that their value lies in their appearance and their ability to please others, of course they're going to internalize those messages. The competition between women wasn't biological inevitability. It was the result of a system that gave women very few paths to power and recognition, forcing them to compete for the limited spaces available to them. The focus on appearance and male approval wasn't natural vanity. It was adaptation to a world where those were often the only currencies women were allowed to trade in. Modern psychology has thoroughly debunked these early theories about female deficiency. We now understand that gender development is far more complex, involving biological, psychological, and social factors that interact in sophisticated ways. We know that many of the behaviors once attributed to biological inadequacy are actually learned responses to social conditions. Neuroscience has shown us that male and female brains are far more similar than different, and that any differences that do exist are largely the result of socialization rather than fundamental biological destiny. We understand now that children develop their sense of gender identity through social learning, observation, and cultural messaging, rather than through traumatic moments of anatomical comparison. Contemporary feminist psychologists like Karen Horney challenge these theories almost from their inception, pointing out that any envy little girls might feel toward boys probably had more to do with the obvious social advantages that came with being male, rather than anatomy itself. If girls envied anything, it was the freedom, power, and opportunities that boys were granted simply for being born male. But the damage was already done. These ideas had become so embedded in cultural consciousness that they continued to influence behavior long after they were scientifically discredited. The scripts had been written, the roles assigned, the expectations set. Women continued to live according to these psychological blueprints, even as evidence mounted that they were based on faulty premises. The most insidious part is how invisible this programming has become. Most women don't consciously think they're psychologically damaged or incomplete, but they live as if they are. They seek validation constantly. They compete with other women reflexively. They measure their worth through external markers rather than internal satisfaction. They apologize for taking up space, for speaking with authority, for pursuing ambition. They second-guess their own judgment and defer to male expertise, even in areas where they have superior knowledge. They struggle with imposter syndrome, constantly feeling like they're not qualified for positions they've earned. They sabotage their own success when it threatens to outshine the men in their lives. These aren't character flaws. These aren't natural female tendencies. These are learned behaviors based on psychological theories that told women they were fundamentally inadequate and needed to compensate for their deficiencies. Breaking free from these patterns requires first recognizing them. When you catch yourself seeking approval from others, ask whose voice is really speaking. When you feel competitive with other women, examine whether that competition serves your actual interests or whether it's serving a system that benefits from female division. When you feel incomplete without external validation, remember that wholeness comes from within, not from others' opinions of your worth. The process isn't easy because these patterns have been reinforced by centuries of cultural messaging. Every movie, advertisement, song, and story that portrays women as incomplete without male love reinforces these old psychological scripts. Every time successful women are torn down while successful men are celebrated, reinforces the idea that female ambition is somehow suspect or unnatural. But awareness is the first step toward freedom. Once you see the cage, you can start looking for the key. Once you understand that your feelings of inadequacy aren't based on biological reality, but on psychological theories designed to keep women in subordinate positions, you can begin to question those feelings rather than accepting them as truth. You are not missing anything essential. You are not psychologically damaged. You are not incomplete without external validation. You are not naturally competitive with other women. You are not designed to seek your worth through appearance or male approval. These are learned behaviors, and learned behaviors can be unlearned. The next time you feel that familiar ache of not being enough, remember where that feeling came from. Remember that it's not your authentic voice speaking, but the echo of theories that were designed to explain away female oppression rather than address its real causes. Remember that you have the power to choose different thoughts, different behaviors, different relationships with yourself and other women. Your worth is not determined by how others see you. Your completeness doesn't depend on external validation. Your value isn't measured by your ability to attract or please others. You are already whole. You always have been. The only thing that was ever missing was the knowledge that you never needed to be fixed in the first place. This understanding isn't just personal liberation, it's collective transformation. When women stop competing with each other for scraps of validation and start supporting each other's genuine success, the entire dynamic shifts. When women stop seeking completion through external sources and start recognizing their own inherent wholeness, they become unstoppable forces for change. The most radical thing you can do is refuse to live according to scripts that were written to diminish you. The most revolutionary act is recognizing your own completeness in a world that profits from your insecurity. The most powerful choice is supporting other women's success instead of seeing it as a threat to your own. Because here's the final truth. Those early psychological theories couldn't see. Women aren't damaged, incomplete, or fundamentally flawed. They're powerful beyond measure. And that power has always been the real threat to systems built on their subordination. Understanding this changes everything. And once you see it, there's no going back. If this video opened your eyes to patterns you've been living unconsciously, comment below and tell me which part hit you hardest. Which behaviors did you recognize in yourself? And if you're ready to dive deeper into the psychological forces that shape our modern world, hit subscribe, because this is just the beginning of questioning everything you thought you knew about the human mind.